how to grow into senior UX roles in the age of AI. Before we dive into this insightful session we have planned, I'd like to share a brief story behind the creation of our cutting edge MDEX in UX program. If you look at university curricula today in India, historically, both in India and internationally, we often notice a significant gap between industry expectations and academic training, sometimes up to 5 to 6 years. This has always been a major challenge for students, leaving them unprepared for industry demands. At OP Jindal University, we have recognized this gap and decided to take action. While many institutions might struggle to address this challenge, being a UGC setup, but we are in a unique position. As you may all know, OP Jindal is one of the only four private universities in India to have achieved the prestigious Institute of Eminence status. This autonomy allows us to introduce innovative and industry-aligned programs. We wanted to bring the best of the best from Bay Area to our curriculum to bring this gap down. So our graduates can compete on the global stage. Our MDes in UX program is the first of its kind developed in partnership with Career Reactor, a division of UX Reactor. UX Reactor has been recognized by Inc. 5000 for 4 consecutive years and has won the first company award for innovation in design alongside companies like Google and Apple. With office in US, India, and Latin America, Career Reactor has become a leader in design education today. Today, at OP Jindal University is ranked #1 institution in India by QS World Rankings. That's a short story in a nutshell. Since its inception, the program has been a great success, and we are excited to reach out to talented candidates like you today. To take this conversation further, we are honored to have with us one of the founding members of Career Reactor, Professor Prasad Kantamaneni. Without further ado, let me introduce him as our speaker for today. With over 25 years of experience, he has built, trained, and mentored high-performance design teams across the globe. He co-founded UX Reactor and Inc. 5000 companies, as already mentioned, and has contributed to over 12 papers and patents. Notably, he designed the search assistance feature used by internet users worldwide every day. He has worked with the world's best, such as Yahoo, Honeywell, VMware, to mention a few. Once again, welcome, Professor Prasad.
Thank you, Professor Venkatesh.
Yeah. So, Professor Prasad, we'll start with the first question. Can you tell us how is AI changing the career landscape for designers?
Yeah. So before I get into that, I'm very curious how many years of experience everyone has. So it'd be great if you could just type in your chat, how many years of experience do you have as designers? Okay, I see 13, 14, 2 years. Okay, we have a range. Awesome. Awesome. Cool. Oh, we also have someone who's exploring it as a career. Awesome. Cool. So, Saurabh, if you could present, I want to, and again, I have some slides that I'm going to talk about, but I really want to have a conversation and make sure that you walk away from this session, with your doubts cleared. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about how AI is changing the career landscape for designers in 3 parts. Okay. So in any organization, you have 3 different folks here. The first is designers, then you have the companies and the products themselves, and you have the customers, right? Now, with AI, all 3 of these components have changed. So let's actually focus on the designers first. So when we look at the designers, the first thing that happens is when the internet started, it was just a bunch of pages with a bunch of links. But today, when you start thinking about how the products today are built, you're talking about even a product like Amazon gets about 2.5 billion visits a month, right? These products are interactive, they're responsive, they go into different screen resolutions. They're also scalable. They can go from anywhere with multiple devices, multiple number of users, multiple intentions. So the scalability, the same page looks different for different people. And more than that, what has also happened is the backend complexity has also increased. So when you think about a website like Amazon, it is probably connecting with FedEx or Blue Dart or whatever your shipping companies. It is connecting with a bunch of different warehouses where the products are stored. It is also integrated with machine learning to kind of figure out, well, what are people looking for? And designing these kinds of experiences is very, very metrics driven. A second level of complexity when you think about the products that we design today is the number of devices and how we design for it. So earlier, when we used to design for one device at a time. So you're creating a mobile application, or you're creating a website, or you're creating a desktop application, or you're creating maybe a on-screen experience. Right? But today, when you think about it as designers, we are no longer thinking about it as one experience at a time. In theory, you could actually add an element to your shopping cart and forget about it. A week later, you might get an email that you check on your mobile device, and you might say, "Hey, I want to purchase it," and you would end up purchasing on your mobile experience, right? Or you might see a certain movie that you might purchase a movie on your mobile on your desktop, and you might see it on your TV, right? So the level of interconnectedness between these experiences, or you might even talk to Alexa, say, Alexa, I want something, and a certain experience is delivered on a certain other device. And so we are not talking about devices that are individually designed, but whether we're talking about devices that are all connected with each other, and you could start your experience on any one device and you could end it on any other device, right? And not just that, the way you interact with the devices have also changed. So earlier we are talking about touch or click, but today we are talking about gestures, how you where you're looking, how you're speaking. So the number of interactions, the modes of interactions have also increased. Now add to all of this an additional complexity of what AI is bringing to the table. So when you look at the AI component of it, so if you go on the next slide, Saurabh, yeah. So what has changed is what we used to ship in about 4 weeks, we are expected to ship in 4 days. Right? Not just that, where you used to have teams of 10 or 12 people, now you're talking about shipping the same product with the same level of maybe more complexity in teams of 4 or 5 people. Right? So this is a significant change in environment for designers. Right? Now let's stop and think about how it has changed for companies. How are companies looking at this experience? So if you go on to the next slide, right? Let's go to the next one, please. Yeah. So when you look here, every product, literally, you just go online and just search for a product. Every product is in an AI arms race. Everybody is competing to see how they can incorporate AI to make things simpler, faster, better. But there's also a trade-off that most of us from outside don't realize. So if you go on to the next slide, right? The trade-off when you look at this is revenues are getting hurt. Right? A simple thing like Google is saying my ad revenues are going to be sluggish going forward, right? Or 84% of companies that rely on a search engine for their traffic are saying that their traffic is changing, their business model is changing, their profitability is changing, right? In fact, there's a company called Chegg that is based out of the US that works on helping people do their homeworks, assignments. Now, it turns out with AI, their revenue has dropped almost about 90%. Right? They're close to bankruptcy. So there are companies that are completely changing their business models, or they have to reimagine their complete business models as AI gets into the picture. Right? But you also need to understand every company runs on profits. How do you make money and how profitable are you? And if you're a publicly traded company, every quarter you have to report to the market as to what your profitability is. And now let's look at profitability from the company's perspective, because this, obviously we are doing a lot of great AI and stuff like that. But you think about profitability, there's something that's fundamentally changing. The issue is traditionally before AI, what used to happen is you used to put 60% of your revenues used to be profits, right? And plus or minus. You're talking about employees would be about 28%, your labor costs were about 28%, and then other costs, servers, facilities, all that stuff would be about 12%. Right? Now, all of a sudden, you've introduced AI, so it's computationally complex. You need very specialized technologies and all that stuff. So AI itself, just that one chunk is costing 30%. You're not introducing new products, but instead for the same old product, you're introducing AI. So your cost structure is the same. Your profitability all of a sudden has dropped to half. So how do you think these companies are going to survive? If you were the financial officer of that company, every quarter you are under pressure to go to the market and say somehow you are doing better than the market, right? And so the challenge, that is where you see a lot of news about layoffs. Right? You're seeing a lot of discussions about companies saying, yeah, we're going to shut down initiatives, shut down products, or we're going to lay off. But at the same time, we are doubling down on AI because companies realize that if you do not focus on AI, you are not surviving the next 5 years. Right? And this is really, really important when you start thinking about companies and why the job market is the way it is. So let's go on to the next slide. So when you think about customers, right, there's still an even more profound shift for customers, the people that we design our products for. So let's go on to the next slide. So one of the things that is fundamentally changed is attention span, right? Now you might realize, like, we would create these pages and people would, we assume that people are going to look at our products or whatever. In the past, it used to be that, yeah, if you're logging onto a desktop or you're working on the desktop, you're possibly sitting there for maybe 30 minutes or 40 minutes or an hour and you're working. So you're using one single device for 30 minutes. But today, what has happened is we touch our cell phones about 2,000 times a day. So each time you touch it, you might probably only look at it for 30 seconds, maybe look at two or three apps. And so the amount of attention you have is much smaller. Additionally, you're touching multiple devices throughout the day. And so there is a multiple device experience. And so customers themselves, their attention spans are smaller. They're a lot less patient and they want the product experience to come to them rather than they go to the product. And so that is a significant change in the way our customers are looking at it. Now, when you look at the other aspect of it, let's go to the next slide. Right. This is another fundamental change. And again, I'm sure all of you are thinking through the same thing. Earlier, we used to say if I have to send an email, sending an email is a series of tasks. The first thing I do is I'm going to log into my email. And then once I log in, I'm going to find a certain email. And then once I find the email, I'm going to read that email. I'm going to draft my response. I might do a grammar check or whatever. And then I would say, okay, let me send it. But today, I'm not as patient. Right? You are not as patient. And so the chances are you want to just send an email. I just want to respond. And so that is where the difference is. So products are moving from doing a series of tasks to delivering the outcome. Fundamentally, what is it that your customer wants to achieve and what is the fastest way to deliver that outcome? Here's an example of somebody writing an email and you say, okay, yeah, I want to write a cover letter about a job in marketing. And then immediately something types out and then it's done. Now, this is a fundamental shift. Whereas You have to think about how to do the job. The system is thinking about it. You're simply telling the system what you want to achieve, and you're managing the system. There's a difference in the way we are working with our computers. And this is the third change that has happened from the customer perspective. Right? Now let's step back and see, okay, now if your job as a designer has changed, okay, if the company's perspective about profitability and what it needs to do to survive and grow is different, and the customer's expectations of what they want for a product has changed, then how are you going to do? How are you going to evolve into a designer that's going to be able to deliver in this environment? Let's go to the next slide. So this is an interesting piece of data where we said, and again, this was about a year old when we looked at it. And turns out more and more companies are now hiring for cognitive skills. What do cognitive skills mean? It means, are you able to understand the information that's being presented to you? Are you able to make decisions? Are you able to look at the data? Are you able to do complex information processing? Are you able to think about the problem in different ways? Because at the end of the day, when you look at an AI, it is good at answering a specific question, but you need to know what question you're asking. Are you asking the correct question? And so fundamentally, jobs have moved to look for people with higher order cognitive skills. Right? And that is a huge shift. Most people think that with AI, you need to learn Chat GPT or some other tool. No, that's not the point, because that is not making you valuable for an organization. What is making you valuable for the organization is this thought process. Let's go on to the next slide. And so this is where you start seeing the difference. The salaries for designers who understand AI has increased. That's what the first chart is saying. It is increasing and it will continue increasing, right? However, for people who are not capable of handling this complexity, layoffs are also increasing, right? So instead of having 10 people on your team where you're paying maybe 10,000 bucks or whatever, you're hiring 5 people where you're paying 20,000 bucks to every person, right? The cost to company is still the same. However, the number of people that you're hiring is different, right? The quality of people that you're hiring is different, right? And so fundamentally, there are three skills that companies are looking at. Number one, do you have the problem solving skills? Do you have the communication skills? Because if you're working in smaller teams at faster speeds, you have to have the communication skills. You have to be able to explain the problem and reach a consensus. That is also important. It's not just about talking, but how do you reach agreement and how do you get to the next level? Next one is, how are you improving your productivity by incorporating AI into your systems and processes? Right? And finally, do you know when to deploy AI and when not to deploy AI? That is important because sometimes not deploying AI is also the correct answer, because you are saving money for your company. And thinking through these elements is what is defining this career shift for people, is what companies are looking for as you move forward.
That was insightful, Prasad. Prasad, can you tell us what do students need to learn to move up in their career?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, um, you know, when we started off, or at least, before me, we were probably one of the first guys who I trained as a human factors engineer. Right? And so for me, we were working more on the aviation, military, nuclear, those areas where mistakes by people would cause death or huge amounts of losses. Right? And so
Right.
that is where we started our careers at. So, but before that, it was all pretty much, if you can draw, if you can, make something look beautiful, that's where you had the jobs. Then at that some point, companies realized that, well, wait a minute, let's actually start thinking about people who understand this as a science, who understand the complexity behind it. And so we were the people that got our opportunities. So we suddenly moved from these, aviation and nuclear industry into the e-commerce and the IT industry. Right? But today it's gone to the next level. Right? So with AI, it's the next level. So Saurabh, if you can share the next couple of slides, that would be helpful. And so what I want to talk about is what is happening for you, because you mentioned about your years of experience. A lot of folks talked about the years of experience. And so I want to talk about what it means for people with different levels of experience. Okay. So the first level is the junior level folks. The junior level folks traditionally don't get paid that much, right? Their conceptual knowledge is on the weaker side because they expect to be working in companies and kind of build up that conceptual knowledge. However, they are expected to be able to execute. Right? When you come to mid-level folks, their salaries are significant. Again, when I talk salary significance, it's significant in terms of the company balance sheets. Okay, so mid-level folks are paid pretty well, right? However, their conceptual skills are still developing, and the on the other side, their execution, they're still fairly strong because when they're juniors coming in, they're strong. But as you get to the senior level roles, your execution skills go down. Your conceptual skills become super strong because that's when you start managing people and thinking through that. And then your salaries are also very high. So you have few of the senior level people, a lot of the mid-level people, and much more. It's like a pyramid, a lot more of the junior level folks. Now, when you start thinking about AI, what happens fundamentally is the need for execution skills goes down dramatically. So when you talk about junior, and again, I'm not talking about UX alone, it could be engineering, anything within the IT space is going through a similar transformation. Okay? So when you talk about a junior person, suddenly the one skill that you were so proud of is not necessarily that much valued within an organization. And so that is what you're seeing in the market is companies are shy to hire junior level folks. Now, what does a junior level person need to do to move forward? They need to focus on their conceptual skills. Now, when you come to the senior level person on the other side, these guys are great. However, they don't understand AI systems and processes. And so, but they understand what needs to be done, what outcomes need to be done. So companies still value the senior level folks, but they're missing those specific skills. And the junior level person is not delivering it. So this is where the weight falls on the mid-level person. Now, when you look at the mid-level person, unfortunately, again, the execution goes down, the conceptual skills are not there. And so that is where a lot of the layoffs are happening because they're saying this is where we're going to optimize the cost structures. But at the same time, the opportunity is also there because the mid-level folks already have the conceptual skills. If they started incorporating AI and understanding how to improve their productivity and how to deploy AI, now they become invaluable to the organization because now they're part of the transformation. They're part of the solution for the companies, right? And so when you think through this, for the junior level person, the focus is on the conceptual skills. For the mid-level folks, the focus is now on AI skills and understanding how to, incorporate that within our processes and systems. And then for the senior level folks, it is all about how do you now manage these systems and processes to be able to deliver at higher orders of speed and complexity. Right? And this is what you need to think depending on where you are at your level of seniority. Right? Let's go on the next slide. And so when we think about it, right, and again, this is also the thought process that we put in when we design the master's degree program, is what are the clear-cut skills that you need to have? The first skill that you need to think about is how to use AI to deploy products. So that is productivity, right? How do you improve your productivity? So it's about understanding your skills and strengths. It is about understanding the strengths and weaknesses of the product or the tools that you're using. And it's also about learning how to collaborate with the AI. So when do you give the job to the AI? When do you do it yourself? What part of the task should you give? What part of the task should you not give? Right? So what should you automate? Not these are the kinds of decisions that you need to make when you're thinking about using AI to deploy products. The second skill that you need to be thinking about is how do you design AI products? Now, an interesting thing, just so you kind of understand, um, you know, why does it cost so much money to deploy AI? Yeah. I'm going to give you a simple example. When we were using deploying search assistants for the first time, earlier you used to do you after you hit enter is when the server returns a result, right? But now every alphabet you type, you're actually doing a query. So the number of queries that you're doing has increased 10 times, right? So if you were spending $100 million on your servers, and suddenly the number of queries has increased 10 times, your expenditure has gone from $100 million to $1 billion, right? And so it is very important as a designer to realize, should I even automate it? When should I do it? And when can I use other systems that are not AI systems? How do I do it? So one of the ways that we solved the problem was we waited for the person to stop typing, because we said that is when the person is looking for suggestions. So if you type in 5 letters and you wait for maybe 10 milliseconds, that's when the system says, let me do a query. So instead of doing 10 queries, we did only 2 queries, right? So that is where a fundamental difference comes in, is thinking about how you're going to design AI within the products that you're doing, when you should use it, when you should not use it, what are the risks of doing something. Those are the kinds of problems you need to think, right? The next one that you need to be thinking about is apprenticeships, right? This is very different from internships. Okay. When you're thinking apprenticeships, it's about working with multiple products in short periods of time. You join a company, work with them for 3 to 4 weeks, understand the problem, solve it, jump out. Just when you're getting comfortable with that team, jump out, go work with some other organization, right? So, for example, some of the kinds of products that we have within our ecosystem that that our students are working on is they're working on a robotic arms for people who don't who are amputees, or they're creating AR or VR solutions for healthcare, or expert system for doctors. How do you help doctors make fewer mistakes or make sure that they're getting better outcomes? So those are the kinds of problems that you need to kind of jump in, quickly, rapidly solve it, jump out. So because at the end of the day, when you solve multiple of these problems, you start realizing how they're all connected. And you start learning those management and those critical learning skills, or the critical thinking skills. And lastly, probably the least appreciated but most important, is every individual needs to think about their brand. What is your brand online, right? What is the content that you're talking? What is the delivery? So a lot of times we use LinkedIn or we just put a lot of stuff out there. For the people that know what you're talking about, they look at it and they're making judgments about you, right? For people that don't know, maybe your peers or whatever, they're looking at it and they're saying, okay, good, you're getting likes and stuff, but not all likes are same, right? Getting a like from people who know makes the difference between getting your next opportunity versus not getting your next opportunity. So that is where you have to be very systematic and planned in managing and creating your brand, in how you communicate, what you communicate, and how you communicate your message. And this is where communication skills are absolutely important. This is something that, I realized when I went to Harvard, because one of that courses that they make you do at Harvard is an acting class. And I'm thinking, why would a management guy need to learn acting? Turns out that is what you're doing. You are actually going in and communicating to your managers, you're communicating to your peers, you're communicating to your direct reports, you're communicating with engineers, product managers. Everything is a storytelling, right? Unless you get everybody else excited, how are people even going to follow what you're going to say? And so that is where communication skills probably is the biggest investment that you will make for long-term success for yourself. And if you do these 4 things, it's actually going to significantly change your career.
Thanks, Prasad. It feels like I should enroll for MDiS all over again. Though I finished my MDiS. Okay, all right. So with this, we'll come to the end of the webinar, and I'd like to open the session for question and answers from the audience.
And again, our intention is to share some of the stuff that we have, and we're going to do this every month.
Yep.
We're going to keep coming out and talking about it, because we realize that there's a lot of places that talk about how you learn design, but really not a lot of places where you talk about how you grow in your career, how do you get promoted, how do you become a leader, how do you get those opportunities with these companies that you dream of. And I think that is what we need to aspire for in this global environment. So, we have probably about 30 minutes more, and I'm happy to answer any questions
Questions.
that you have so that we can go
Yeah.
forward. So, yeah.
So, Saurabh, are you taking a look at the questions? Let me
Yeah,
try.
there is one question. How to be with the trends as a designer is one question.
How do we what?
How to be up to date with trends is what I think Anushri is trying to talk about.
So, I think, see, being up to date with trends, is simply about a lot of reading and learning. Trends are, you know, there are multiple trends. I want you to understand this. There are trends which are visual trends, which talk about motion design or how something looks visually and all that. But there are also trends that are at an interaction level. There are trends that are happening at research level. So these are, when you say trends, these are innovations, right? How are people doing research? What is changing? How are people doing interaction design? What is changing? And so even today, what I do is I spend a lot of time. There are a few people that I follow on a regular basis, right? And I keep looking at what they're doing, how they're talking, and what their thought processes are, right? And I also look at how products are evolving, you know. And as you start thinking, and I also think about it, right? It's not just about what somebody's saying. I'm saying, well, if they did this motion graphics, well, why did they do that? What is the implication, right? How will that work for a large product that is serving, let's say, 100 million requests a minute? How does that work? Because it's going to increase the bandwidth. So how would you reduce the bandwidth? So thinking through the problem from a critical perspective makes us a lot more effective. The other aspect that I also say is trends is not just looking, but it's also having a group of people around you. Sitting down with that group of people and discussing, because when you're creating communities, there are two kinds of communities. The first kind of community is you're networking for the sake of networking. I know so and so, I know so and so, we are all friends, right? So that's one level. But you also need a second level of community where you're discussing why do this, why not do something else, how else should you think about it, right? You should have a community of people that are challenging you, making you think about the problem in a different way, and that is where you fundamentally learn some of the more deeper aspects. you know for example, we have within our community, there was a very interesting discussion because I talked about doing minutes of meetings. How should you do minutes of meetings within an organization? Because your stakeholders don't listen to you. Okay. And so 4 weeks later or 5 weeks later, we were having discussions. One guy got promoted, or got, because they were doing this, everybody within their organization was saying like, oh wow, this guy's doing really good work. Everybody started going to that guy for advice just because they started doing minutes of meeting. Another guy actually got a performance improvement plan. They got a warning for doing the same thing. So what is the difference, right? And when you sit in a community and you talk about it, then you start realizing this is how you grow in your career. So trends are, in some ways, very shallow, but having those discussions is what helps you evolve. So my argument is definitely keep reading, keep educating yourself, evolving, but also have that critical thought and that discussion, have a group of people that you can talk so you can move up.
So we have one classic questions like will AI take away our jobs? So
Right.
Deep asks, will AI can think like a UX designer in the future?
It's a really good question, right? But let's actually think about what WhatsApp did. Okay. Before WhatsApp, you had a lot, I mean, there were a lot of chat tools that were available throughout history, right? You had Google Chat, there was Microsoft Chat, Hotmail, whatever. Everybody, Yahoo had a chat. All of these guys had chats. But what fundamentally changed? There was Skype that sold for $1 billion and all that. But what fundamentally changed when WhatsApp came? What changed? Right? So fundamentally, what changed was before, when you were signing up, you had to fill a form with 20 different elements. You had to do all of that stuff. Then you created your account. You downloaded a piece of software, and then you would ask all your friends, hey, what's your handle? And then you'll get that handle, and then you'll type it in, and you'll search for that person, and then you'll add them into your contacts, and you start talking to them. Now, fundamentally, somebody came and said, okay, well, wait a minute. Why do I need to do so much hard work to talk to someone? Why do I need to enter somebody's information? I just want to magically have all my friends in my contacts. Right? And that's fundamentally why do I need a password to remember to use a certain application? That's what they thought. And that's exactly what WhatsApp's innovation was. They said, just put in your telephone number, we'll authenticate you automatically, and all your contacts are brought in, and your friends are automatically put into your platform. That's it, magic. Right? These guys went from 0 to 100 million users in a matter of a year or 2 years. Right? So when you now imagine when you think about AI and you say, will AI take my job? Like, understand, right? AI will take your job if you're the guy that's designing the routine chat applications. It will most definitely take your job, right? However, if you're the guy that's actually challenging AI, like, is there a way I see a problem? Can I design something without putting in a 5 different form fields? Can I do something without remembering my password? Can I have all my friends without telling the system who my friends are? Right? When you ask these higher level order questions, that makes you think AI is never going to be able to ask those questions. That is what is the difference between the higher order cognitive thinking. If you can ask those questions, your jobs are safe for as long as you want to work, because you know now how to manage AI to get your work done.
Great.
Okay?
So,
And one other aspect I also want to talk about this is there's a slightly different perspective also, which is, automation, right? How does automation help our change our work life? So when you think about Ford Motor Company, when they were created, and they were like the best jobs in the industry because you had thousands of people working in a factory creating cars. Okay? Now all of a sudden you introduce robots into the company. Okay. So all of these jobs that were unskilled were lost. So instead of having thousands of people, at most, you go to any automotive company, you might have no more than maybe 100 people in a shift, and you're working 3 shifts. Okay. In those 100 people, the qualifications of the people that are expected to work is much higher. You're expecting engineers, mechanical engineers, electrical engineers, computer engineers, all working together to make that system work or make the factory floor work, right? So earlier, you just needed to have maybe like a polytechnic degree to be able to work in the factory floor. But now you need to have higher credentials to be able to deliver the work, right? However, the salaries have also changed. Earlier, you used to be paid maybe like, $100, $200 a month. Now you're getting paid $5,000 or $6,000 a month, right? So there's a fundamental shift in the salaries that are coming. Not just that, at that time, there was only one factory that was creating cars. Today, you look at there are 40 factories that are creating cars, right? So the point I'm trying to make is, as automation and the complexity of our jobs increases, we can either say, I'm going to be the unskilled worker that has lost their job and I'm going to complain about life, or we're going to figure out how we're going to become more skilled to be able to manage those processes and systems and take control of that opportunity. And that is where the fundamental mindset needs to be.
so Prasad, I have one personal question, not from the audience. You mentioned that how the WhatsApp has actually gained traction in a very short time. On the similar lines, if you look at the Google and search engine, I personally use, I mean, we personally use it for a lot of queries, apart from getting information from there around. Now, a lot of my search goes to the chat GPT or any GPT to get that, submit what is it. Instead of going to the Google and, go to another link and read about it. So do you think the Google has best that buzz where, it could have integrated the Gemini earlier than the GPT? Or
Right.
because I personally don't use, I mean, 20% only, let's say I used of about 80% of searches on the Google, but now I do that opposite. I mean, most of the search goes to ChatGPT, and then only for to find places nearby, the routes, I use Google. So do you think there
Right,
is?
right. So I think that's one of the reasons why you see the drop in search traffic.
Right, right. Okay.
So earlier, where people would search and click on a website and go and look at the website, now your experience is not in your control because Gemini is summarizing your page, and now
Right,
you have to decide whether you want to click or not.
right,
Right? So that is also a user experience problem that we designers have to solve. How do we create experiences that allow you to engage with your product where customers are not willing to even come to your website?
right, right,
You know? And so there's a fundamental change, and these are challenges that we need to think through as designers, that we will need to solve. Right?
right. Yeah,
And that's something we need to think about. But I also see some questions where it is like, hey, is this degree recognized by US universities? And I do want to mention that this is a program that is recognized by the UGC, the government of India. And so you have worldwide recognition. So the program itself is this is like any other degree program. And again, one thing I do want to mention, it's not a pure online program. It is a blended program
yeah.
where you have to come to our campus for
Immersion.
9 days, where you have to be immersed and you have to learn to apply all the concepts you have learned and deliver a product, right? So this is something that you do definitely need to think through is, yeah, recognition and all that. This is a regular university. This is the number one university in India, and it is recognized, and a lot of the stuff that we are doing here today is also going to be shared with a lot of other universities to improve their best practices as well.
Yeah. So, Prasad, we have one question from the fresher side. How to
Right.
get an apprenticeship as a fresher?
I think getting apprenticeships is our problem, right? So there are two aspects to it, right? So we have already connected because majority of the folks that are coming into this ecosystem are already experienced. They know what they're doing, and we do have, like, I think about 20% of our students are people who are freshers. Okay, because these guys we believe are exceptional, and we know that we can change their life, right? But a majority of folks are people with at least 2 to 2 years plus years of experience, who are, for whatever reason, stagnated in their careers, or who are kind of struggling to figure out how to move forward, or who want to become leaders within their organization. And so that is where they're moving forward. So the way we structure it is we have a lot of organizations that are partners with us, and you end up doing apprenticeships with these different companies, right? However, there is your responsibility as well. So we teach these modules, and you are expected to pass in those modules. So for example, we will teach you how to audit a product. Okay, you need to get the pass mark in that class so you can go and apprentice and audit a product for somebody else, right? Or let's say you have to think through design a transactional experience in your apprenticeship. Then you need to pass your transactional experience classes, right? Those courses. And if you pass in those courses, then you get into that. So the short answer to that is, it is our responsibility to get the apprenticeships, right? However, it is your responsibility to make sure that you're getting the minimum grades to qualify for those apprenticeships.
Right. Prasad, then moving on to the next question. Uh, Richa Pal, she says there is a constant debate between being a generalist and a specialist as a UX designer. What is your take on it for a mid-level designer still beginning their career journey?
So I think when you're talking about specialists, it's about, specializing into research or interaction or visual, or maybe even content. I'm assuming that is what the person is asking. And I think the answer to that is innately no designer. I mean, to be honest, I spent a lot of years in the industry, and I've trained a lot of people. I used to be, the global manager for research within my own organization, before I created my own company. And What I realize is having a generalist designer is somehow, you start off as a generalist, but you have certain interests, right? So you are either intuitively, if you're very logical, then turns out you're probably a better interaction designer, right? Or a researcher. If you're very analytical and you kind of are able to look at a lot of data and synthesize it, you probably have an interest in research. So what would most likely happen is you would start doing generalist work, but you start realizing where your interests are and you start building your skills. And to be honest, I started my career as a researcher, right? And then because I'm analytical, I ended up I'm really good at interaction design. However, I'm colorblind. I can't do visual design for nuts, right? But I know how to manage visual designers. And so this is something that is unique for me, for my skill set and my abilities, right? And so the answer that I would say is when you're a junior, you want to start doing everything, see where your interests are, and build your skill sets in those areas. And that is also part of, when you're thinking as a master's degree program, you have to get exposed to all of those. You have to be exposed to thinking in those different perspectives and then start realizing what your interests are. It is very hard to get into a job and say, I'm going to figure out what I want to do because companies are no longer willing to invest at that level, right? And so you should be ready when you're getting into companies. You should figure out what your strengths are and have a minimum strength, minimum conceptual abilities in those concepts.
Great. So, Prasad, we have another question, interesting question.
Sure.
Why in Indian market, a person looking to work in UX or a product design role also need to have a tech knowledge such as coding and other things? Or,
I think that is changing. That is changing. And again, let me talk you through this, right? So there are three types of companies. We've done a lot of research within the Indian space. In fact, a lot of the curriculum that when we were creating the curriculum, we talked to almost about 1,000 odd designers to understand where they were in their careers. We talked to almost about 500, 600 different companies to understand because we're trying to connect all of these things. How do you make people more effective? What we realize is there are three types of companies within the Indian space. Right? In fact, maybe not the Indian space, it's a global. We see the same thing in the
yeah,
US, we see the same thing in Latin America, but the ratios are different. Okay. And I'll talk a little bit about the ratios. So the first kind of company is a type 1 company, which doesn't understand UX, doesn't care about UX. Okay. So you go there, the person will basically make you do a lot of, screens or visuals or whatever, and somebody will micromanage you to get all the work done. Okay. These guys, they're not going to help you build your career. And so type 1 companies, there are a lot of those kinds of jobs within the ratio within those jobs in India is very high, right? But the salaries are also very high. When you look at those companies, I've seen companies that pay like maybe 1.5 lakhs to 2 lakhs. I don't even know how somebody can survive at that salary in India. But there are companies that pay 2 lakhs and got designers, UX designers on their staff. But that's a type 1 company, right? Then you have type 2 companies. Okay. So type 2 companies are companies that understand what good design is, but they don't know how to do it. So maybe their founders or their senior folks have worked in companies that do good design, but when they come out, they don't understand how do I hire the correct people? How do I create the correct environment? How do I create the correct kind of cooperation between different teams? They don't understand that, right? But they are constantly trying to hire people, talk to people to figure out how they're going to figure it out, right? And then you have type 3 companies that understand what good design is and they know how to do it, right? So type 2 companies pay more, but there's also a good hiring and firing rate because they don't know how to do it. And so they'll test you out. If it doesn't work, they'll fire you. They'll keep moving through it until they reach some level of stability, right? Whereas when you look at type 3 companies, they pay really, really well, right? Like you're talking, these are the kinds of companies that you see on the newspapers. They say somebody got like a 40 lakh package or a fresher got a 40 lakh package or a 60 lakh. They pay really, really well. They're extremely selective. But when you crack those companies, you're set. And they're always, and the interesting thing is these jobs are few, but they are not able to fill the jobs. I have friends who work with the Googles and the Apples and the Microsofts and all these guys. When I talk to them and when I, out here, when I go to Seattle or I go to the Bay Area, I talk to them and say, I have more budget to hire in India, but I'm not able to find the talent. That is the common problem that I hear from all of these companies. So my argument, right, is when you're starting to plan your career and you're starting to think through it, right, be very careful what kinds of companies you get into. Because you start off at the wrong company, you're probably going to spend 5 or 6 years more trying to evolve than if you start off at the correct company. So be very careful, plan your companies appropriately, and then move forward. And aspire for the type 3 kinds of jobs. If you aspire for those jobs, you'll end up in a type 3 or a high type 2 company, which is really good for you. So do you think that answers the question, Venkatesh?
Yeah, I think it's pretty much. We have another question from a fairly different category altogether. So we have a person who like to switch a career from animator to UX. So what do you think the chances are switching to UX at this point?
I think they're good, right? So the main thing is, see, when you're transitioning, and again, we have selected some students, for example, somebody who was an engineering manager who spent about 10 years as an engineer who wants to do UX, right? Uh, we do accept them in our programs, right? Or you have folks who have, let's say, a background in commerce or whatever, and they're transitioning. So, but the one question that we ask them is, well, what are you going to do with the knowledge you already have, right? So if somebody is transitioning to a different job, in fact, one of the toppers in the previous cohorts is an animation guy, you know, and and what is interesting is this person is probably going to end up in the AR VR space because this person understands that, and so AR VR has a huge demand for that kind of skill set. And so what you need to think is, how are you going to leverage your existing skill set into UX? Okay. If you're thinking I'm going to learn UX and start my career from zero again, I don't advise it. Because if you were, let's say, earning about 15, 20, 30 lakhs as an animator, and suddenly you get into UX and you are just saying, I'm going to transition 100%, when I'm going to forget everything I learned before, that's really bad because you probably start off maybe with a 10 lakh salary, you're losing your salary, you're losing your career, right? Whereas, for example, the story of this animator, this person is doing really well in their job and getting paid really well. But what they're doing is they're taking that knowledge and applying it into the UX space. They're learning UX and kind of building on top of it. And
Yeah.
so when they go into an AR, VR project and they're saying, I'm going to use my animation skills and my UX skills to design AR, VR products, that's next level, right? So your value is more than when you were just an animator. And that's what I want you to think. Career changes are good, right? Even for engineering, it's the same thing. When you go from engineering to design, how are you leveraging it? Are you now in a position where you can do better design because you're an engineer, right? Or do you just want to say, I don't want to talk to engineers again? Are you able to negotiate with engineers to do better work, right? And I think that is the concept that you need to think about as you're thinking about changing your career. How do you use your previous knowledge to get to the next level and then build your career from there rather than start from zero?
Makes sense. Yeah. So, thank you, Prasad. I think with this we were able to cover the all categories of questions. Though there are many other questions, but Prasad has answered, broadly all of them. We'll try to address these questions offline. If we, if we're able to save the chat and revert back to them. But with this, we have come to the end of the webinar, and you've been a wonderful audience, and I'd like to thank Professor Prasad once again. And we'll come back with more such seminars in the future. Since I mentioned this is a webinar series, and we'll come back with whatever speakers in the future. We'll
Yes.
be having a webinar each month, and join us.
Yeah. And I do
Thank
want to say that, again, um, you know, we have two intentions, right? Obviously, we want you to succeed. That is, really important. And what we realize is within the industry, there is a huge dearth of somebody just telling you what is right. You go on LinkedIn or wherever, the biggest challenge that comes is, 100 people will like it, all your friends will like it, but nobody will tell you, well, wait a minute, this is not how it works in the industry. You know, Nobody will tell you how you grow your career. And I think that is what is, I feel in India that the biggest challenge, that you have a lot of passionate people, amazingly passionate folks, right? Who want to become leaders. In fact, when I look at the applications within our program, some of those guys, they're like managers. Like we have managers in companies that come in, big companies, right? Like Mastercard or, those kinds of companies into it. They apply. And I asked them like, well, why are you applying, right? And what has humbled me in that statement is these guys say, listen, I am managing people, but if I don't know what good design is, how am I doing justice to my direct reports? You know, and I think that is that sense of growth and that sense of perfection. Like, I want to be good at my job. And I think that is what we are here to help you with. We are here to help you be competent, be good at your job, and have build amazing careers, right? And so that is something that we would encourage you to just kind of keep joining us. We will be doing this on a monthly basis. And if you're interested in doing the master's degree program, or you want to learn more, do talk to the folks at Upgrad, because they will give you a lot more context. And if you qualify, we will be, Saurabh and I and Venkatesh, we will be interviewing you, and we'll be having a lot more deeper conversations to better understand where you are in your career. So, with that said, I wish you guys the best of luck, and I look forward to seeing you again in the long term.